Welcome to podcast for Radio Cavallo for European University Institute, the space where we unpack the complexities of our digital world and explore how technology is shaping the way we live, learn, and engage. In today's episode, we are deep diving into a provocative and essential question. Are young people really digital natives, or have we misunderstood their relationship with technology entirely? We're joined by a special guest to discuss Beyond Digital Natives, a powerful new reader by Professor Alex Grech that challenges the myths we tell about youth and tech. This isn't just a critique of generational assumptions, it's a call to action. The paper explores how digital performance culture, generative AI, misinformation, and data-driven platforms are reshaping not only how young people communicate, but also how they think, relate, and participate as citizens. So the episode is for anyone who believes in the potential of youth, but also understands that digital empowerment takes more than a Wi-Fi connection and a smartphone. First of all, Professor Grech, I would like to thank you for your time and for joining us on this extremely interesting and very, very topical podcast today. My first question, I guess, would be, and I'm familiar with your paper, which is an extremely interesting read, but the first question I have to ask is, why did you feel it necessary to write this paper now?
Oh, yeah. Now is always an interesting concept because now it implies a moment in somebody's life, and it also implies a moment in history. And in my case, a moment in technology, media history, and a whole bunch of other stuff, I guess. So why now? So first of all, there's my personal moment in my life, because I'm at the stage of I've been, I guess, researching how media, technology, and education contribute to making our lives better, or even worse. And that's what I've been researching really over the last 20 years. I've been very much interested in things like post-truth societies, I guess, transversal education, and anything in between. So that's my personal moment of it's not just time to take stock. It's just another moment where I think a lot of us, when I'm saying a lot of us being people who have a background in, I guess, in media, but in strategy, in different types of approaching what we call education, and which I increasingly prefer to think in terms of lifelong learning, look at this moment. The second thing about time is that it's inevitable that generative AI and its primary interface in our case now, which is large learning models, are now mainstream, and definitely are definitely mainstream when it comes to students and their relationship with what we still call education, which is still a model which has its roots in several thousands of years of what we believe is good for people, and which is, I think, increasingly being questioned. I think the last time we had a situation like this, when we questioned, so back to time, when we questioned what is education, what is technology, and what is its impact on technologies during the COVID crisis. And we know how that went, and we know how the academy in a way retreated back to what it thought was best, which is like, bang, let's try and remove the screen as much as possible. Let's go back to face-to-face interactions. Now we are at a deeper, I think, more permanent kind of crisis as everybody is using LLMs and the various ChatGPTs and Claudes of this world, and questioning how we learn, how we teach, why we are learning what we are learning, curricular assessments. So it's all of this is related to why now. And I think the last thing is that I've been teaching young people, I guess, teaching whatever that means, or young people, whatever that means, that implies, say, Gen Z, for many years now. So my students, the students I've been teaching, are not just data for me. They're also the way I learn and question my own assumptions about these things.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting way of sort of interpreting this moment in time, because I think we also live in transition times. And, the interpretation that you have given to now is really interesting for me, because indeed everything is changing and we are having trouble to keep up with this pace. So in your paper, you challenged the concept of digital native, and, you debunk the myth basically. Why has the myth persisted for this long? What do you think? And if you can explain to our audience a little bit more detail, what do you mean by digital native?
Well, the term digital native, I think, became very popular, I think, probably about 15 years ago when Mark Prensky wrote a much cited article, which I think more than assumed is reflected the general view, which was persists till this day, that people who have been born with technology already there are in some way or shape or format different to people like me, who only migrated into technology. So hence the terms digital natives and digital migrants. I'm 64 years old, or will be in 2 days' time. And I'm supposed to be the person who's migrated into, understanding what all this digital technology is all about. The assumption is that somebody like my son, who's 22, going up to 23, we probably took a picture of him in whatever camera we had, probably about 2 minutes after he was born. So he definitely is part of Gen Z. So the assumption is that digital natives have a different relationship with technology to people like me. So why I chose to debunk it, I guess, well, the first thing is, and that's the thing I normally share with my students is, why should a 64-year-old, why should a boomer be teaching this stuff? In fact, I shouldn't even be teaching this stuff. You should be teaching me this stuff. And why don't I retreat to the back of the lecture hall and it's over to you? I'm here to learn. So I think that's the first thing, is who's learning from who? Who's learning what from who? When it comes to digital technologies. And that's when we start to deconstruct many of these things. We've mixed up, I guess, the idea of being a digital native as young people have some sort of magical relationship with screens, with phones, with smartphones, or anything which comes with it. Okay. And there's a certain truth in that. I mean, so definitely my generation was not as much into the gaming culture, I guess, as Gen Z are. I'm definitely not as proficient as my 20-year-old niece in developing a TikTok on the fly. In terms of, however, what is happening to human beings in terms of their interactions with technology, I would dare say that my generation is in a privileged position that we remember life before the internet. We had to grapple with the internet in the late 80s, early 90s. We had to grapple with social media about 22, 23 years ago. And we kind of take these things in our stride. I think the assumption that older people don't get it and young people get it, whatever getting it is a bit naive. And that's what I start to deconstruct in terms of understanding what it means to have some knowledge of critical digital literacies, which is this composite term, which has been kicked around. There are many variants of these things, by the way. Some people call them digital competencies. Some people call it digital fluency. I've been using the term, I guess, digital literacies for a number of years, and I will keep on using it for the time being, even in the new age of AI, because you also now have people saying you need to be AI literate to understand what's going on. So the long answer in terms of digital natives and digital migrants is simply that I think it's a bit naive and a bit outdated now, because while Prensky certainly was onto something when he said, look, people are starting to behave differently, and I agree with him on that count. Just being so dogmatic about it and implying that it's such a huge generational shift that almost like generations won't understand each other, or older generations won't understand what's going on, or younger people really understand what's going on. I think is slightly outdated now in terms of what we've been seeing over the last several years.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we have seen sort of that automatically the assumption is that young people have this literacy skills and they can distinguish fake news from real. But the truth is that young people are most vulnerable because they consume their news sources mainly from sort of TikTok reels and YouTube shorts. So they only see like content. They don't see the full context. And unfortunately, we've seen the outcome of this in many sort of Eastern European countries as well. You know, like if you take elections in Romania, where TikTok played such a huge part, also elections in my native country, Georgia. You know, young people are consuming all this one-sided news, and they don't even have they don't even check their news sources. So I think this digital native myth really needs to be debunked, and I think this is really important message to send, that just because someone is young doesn't mean that they are automatically digital literate. So that brings me to my next question, which is just to go into a little bit more technicality. Could you please explain the difference to our audience between the technical digital skills and critical digital literacies as such? Why is the distinction so important, do you think, in today's digital ecosystem?
I'm risking going into lecture mode now, but I see no other way around it in a way. I mean,
it's a pleasure to listen to your lecture, so please go ahead.
So I think let's start with the whole, I guess, notion of critical digital literacies, I guess. Okay. I mean, assuming that we do understand that, that we're going through this huge cultural change. Okay. We're talking about a composite of skills here. So in a way, we're talking about skills that represent our cognitive skills, our technical skills, but also our social capabilities as we try and navigate what is increasingly becoming a complex environment for us, okay, a complex digital environment. So we need to think in terms of critical literacies as a composite that combines things like critical thinking, I guess, awareness, some sort of what is right and what is wrong. So let's call it ethical awareness. I think reflective practices, and even reflexive practices, in terms of how we react to information or news. And as you said, we now consume news and information bite-sized bits. So these are the kind of composite skills that enable us to interpret, evaluate, but also, create digital content, and understanding of the broader impact before we decide to share it. Okay, so let's say it's a composite of skills, and the first question really is we need to think about is, where do you learn these skills from? So do you get these, critical thinking from education or even higher education, or do you get it from your upbringing, from your family, from the value systems that you had wherever you happened to be born, and also increasingly with whatever technology you had at your disposal? Because again, the digital natives and digital migrants concept implies that everybody has access to technology, but also that people who do not have the most recent technology are in some way disenfranchised from people who do have it. And yet I've seen many examples, especially in developing countries, in Africa, where you'd be amazed what kids did with a very basic smartphone, or how they use that smartphone to act information somewhere. So the first thing is it's a composite of skills. And so the questions we need to think about is where do we get all our critical thinking skills, our communication skills, our ethical awareness, and stuff like that. And what I've then tried to do in a way is break down digital literacies into about 8 components. And again, this is why I said I don't want to go into lecture mode, but I'll simply hint at what these 8 concepts are, and the way I've presented them in the reader. So the first one would be, how do we evaluate information? Where do we get our sources from? And again, most people are getting, if we go back to sources, information, news, most people are getting their sources from secondary sources. In other words, when we talk about the media, most people think of the media in terms of mainstream media. They think in terms of, the CNNs of this world, or whatever else we consume, Fox News or radio or print. But most people are now relying on intermediaries, and this might even be people who are blogging, people who are commenting on something for their news. So the media is now itself being mediatized. So the first thing we need to think about is how do we evaluate whether what seems to be information is truthful, its veracity, and do we ever make any attempts at verifying its sources? Okay, so that's the first thing we need to think about. The second thing is what's happening now in terms of AI literacy and what we're calling human agency. Okay, because again, you can think of that. There's been almost like the gold rush of young people now more than other people. Rushing to Gen AI to, I guess, to do an essay very quickly or get through things very quickly or even inform yourself very quickly. We all know that search is being disenfranchised right now. So it's a surprise that Google has had to go all in on AI, because most people are using, say, the various ChatGPTs and Claudes to search for things. So do we now need to become AI literate? And do we need to think in terms of, will Gen AI replace human judgment, I guess, in terms of, context, nuance, ethical implications? Okay, I think the whole thing about AI literacy is using AI tools to enhance rather than replace our critical thinking. Let's move rapidly on. Okay, and some of these things I'll just mention. Okay, data privacy, digital rights management. Again, we know, and it's not just something which happens with young people. Most of us never read the small print in terms of the social media platforms that we all love and trust. In terms of OpenAI and what's going to happen with our searches, I wouldn't hedge my bets on any of the tools that we're using. I think it's only maybe Claude and Anthropic are saying that we're not using your queries or your data. I mean, they're certainly using it to further train the large language models. But in terms of what's happening, with AI allocation, our browsing habits, what's happening with the way these learning platforms are using our data, we don't know much about that, and we need to learn a bit more about that. I think in terms of, this is something which I know you're passionate about, in terms of, digital participation and citizenship. What happens when you say something online? Are you being watched and not watched? Is that content yours? And again, this goes back to the basic naivety. And I'm not sure it's even naivety. It's almost now like a shrug of the shoulders, which most people have. We know very well that there's been no free lunch with social media for a long time. We know that we use these tools mainly in return for an internet connection that we're happy to pay for. We're happy to pay our ISPs. But we know that bad things are happening with our data. Let's leave it at that. I think in terms of, again, a fifth one would be, I guess, the way we're using AI for collaboration. I think in terms of, I mean, I've tried this as well with my students in terms of getting them to use AI collaboratively, and also once you get, say, 6 human beings working on the same project, and using AI for shortcuts or to do things quickly, it brings up a lot of tensions in terms of, again, that human agency. At which stage are you using AI for production collaboration, I guess, rather than being too much dependent on an automated system that you end up with the end product not being what you had in mind in the first place. The sixth one is again very, very popular media studies, which is all related to the attention economy. We know that most people's attention has been gained, including older people. We're all doom scrolling in bed in the morning. Whether it's doom scrolling on the basis of reading, our news and going through the FD, or looking at your favorite TikTok influencers or whatever it is. It's very difficult to get anybody's attention, and you really see this in the lecture hall. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm blaming my students for being like that. I think we should have used the whole notion of the attention economy to make the lecture room more relevant to young people's realities, because why should somebody listen to an older person bestowing some sort of facts or knowledge when those facts or knowledge are already available at a moment's request and using your voice? So I think being aware of how the attention economy has gained us, but also how we resist it, I think is important. I'm getting Johnny.
Absolutely. I just wanted to, this is something not related to the paper, but I think it's really important to highlight that Professor Grech is heading 3CL Foundation, which is based in Malta. And you do a lot of work with young people, not just as a professor, but also in the projects that you've done through 3CL. And you do a lot of work on digital literacies, on digital citizenship. So I know this is an issue for another podcast, but as your work relates to this as well, if you can just walk us through sort of under 3CL umbrella, the work that you are doing, sort of just as a summary with young people with digital literacies, and what do you plan to do in the near future? Where do you think, your strategy lies in terms of that? That would be great. So we get the full picture.
Yeah, I mean, the full picture is that I don't just teach at university. In fact, I set up the 3CL in 2016. It took us till 2017 to get it recognized. It's essentially through the 3CL we've managed to do things quicker, faster, in a much more applied way than you can do it in the academy. And I'll give you a basic example. If you want to change a curriculum in any university, most universities, it will take you about 18 months. So think in terms of the environment I'm talking about, where things are moving very quickly. Through the 3CL, we've had a much more applied approach to critical literacies, and we've had a lot of kind of experiments in terms of how these work. So we published a manifesto, which is now in its second edition, called Young People and Information. We do a lot of stuff in terms of public-facing events, sometimes smaller events, sometimes larger events. I like the notion of getting people from very different backgrounds. They could be educators, philosophers, activists, politicians, policymakers, technology gurus, startup guys. We've had them all. We've even had people who followed one person to troll him during one of our events. And we normally record everything because we think that's data, and it's on the basis of that data that we can then issue things like this reader. So think of the 3CL as the more applied way of how I've been working with digital literacies for the last, I guess, 11 years. I think I was the first person to set up first person to set up a digital literacies component, a new media component within my university 11 years ago. So, in English they say I eat my own dog food. Okay, I don't just teach the stuff. I want to make sure that whatever we're talking about gets challenged. And it's recorded. So anything that we publish is recorded, is published under a Creative Commons license, I guess. I mean, just again, the two, I guess, literacies I did explain, and I don't need to explain them more, is about how to use technology ethically, which is a big problem at the moment. Okay, but also in terms of having tried to get young people to have a passion for lifelong learning, because my philosophy of life is that if you lose your passion to learn, you're dead. And I know some I annoy people by saying this. I know some extremely boring young people who don't seem to have any interest in learning anything. And I know some incredibly wild 80-year-olds that even if their body is flailing, their passion for learning anything, and that includes new technologies, is admirable. But I just think we've been too dogmatic about saying, either saying older people don't get it, young people get it, or else the worst thing is, oh, young people are totally distracted, don't know what the hell is going on, and they're all in a bubble, they all want to be influencers and whatever it is, and just let them be. And just the tail end, and that it is related to what we're doing at the 3CL. If you want to apply some of these digital literacies and see what's going on, just look at the workplace at the moment, where you have technically 5 different generations are in the workplace. Okay, people older than me, boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. Okay, Generation Alpha at the moment are fear, and I'm saying are fear. Even some of my peers, even some my peers at UI, are about literacy, basic literacy, as people become more dependent on technology. So it really is a moment, I think, where when I'm saying some of us with different backgrounds, whether it's in media studies, I think, whether it's in philosophy, whether it's in anthropology or sociology or hardcore computer sciences, AI professors really need to step back before it's almost too late. And I think that's the alarm which is being raised by people like the much not very popular with academics, but very popular with readers. Somebody like Yuval Harari, whom I deeply admire, who says at the moment just because we're getting more information, most of it is junk. So in this age of more junk, and in this age of also potentially adversarial US technology, the US just published its AI strategy. We start reading between the lines, you can see a lot of things over there which kind of snigger and say, okay, so it's going to be shock and awe again. We're at an interesting moment. I think that's the point I want to raise, and I think it's up to us. When I'm saying not just the illuminated, it also means up to us, the illuminated 19-year-olds that occasionally bump into, to
Yes.
learn from each other.
Absolutely. And it does require sort of stakeholder coordination, because it's not just about educators, it's not just about the governments, it's not just about NGOs, it's about everyone. This is something that's sort of interdisciplinary. So I think it's important I know that you are in the process of hosting Young People Summit in Malta in November, which is one of the sort of important focuses is going to be AI literacy. And I know that because we have spoken about this before, you have spoken about the importance of translating the academic discussion into practicalities. So as a tangible outcome of the summit, you have actually spoken about the importance of teaching young people, the practical skills of interacting with AI. So just to sort of announce, because I know it's coming up, and I know 3CL is in the process of putting the summit together and bringing together different stakeholders. Like, if you can tell us a little bit more about this.
Okay, I mean, the idea of these summits, for lack of a better word, is related to our conviction and my conviction that if you put people of different ages around something which most people find interesting, that you can observe some interesting things happening, which is why I said that most of the things we've done, these conferences we've done, we've recorded and learned a lot from. So the manifestos which we've produced on young people and information, a lot of it was based on, I had got young people to actually scrape the content from what they listened to. I wanted to get it filtered, that content, through young people's eyes, and then worked with peer groups of various PhDs around the world to try and get a document which was comprehensible. As it's happened, both manifestos pretty much are targeting not necessarily young people, but they're targeting policymakers, people who can actually do something about fixing the change. I think the whole notion about doing a young people summit in Malta, well, Malta happens to be it's where I happen to live at the moment. Doing something in Malta, and these small insignificant places and islands particularly are particularly attractive for people to come and travel to. I've never had any problems inviting people from different parts of the world and saying, come to Malta for a couple of days and let's all hang around together and let's learn from each other. So that's what we're going to do. I think in terms of this Young People Summit, though, in particular, is something which we heard in the last time we did something related to young people and information, where there were quite a few, when I'm saying young people, they might be students, people in their first jobs, and they said, we need to turn this concept around, that while it's great hanging around with whether it's professors or people running startups is great. I think it's time that for you guys to actually listen to us, or else we actually want to take charge of the narrative of this kind of summit. And that's what we're going to try and do in November in Valletta in Malta, over a Friday and a Saturday. So I think that the structure I've got in my mind at the moment is that have the first day would be a bit more orthodox in terms of having, so-called experts or wiser people turning up. But encourage those people to talk about something practical. And I think in the second day, I'd like to see something a bit more, not necessarily going to say anarchic, but I think we should discuss something. These case studies that we still have to develop. I think I really want older people to be around to help, as opposed as orchestrating the discussion. It's a risk, okay? It's a risk, but we're prepared to take the risk this time around.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to keep the conversation going and to bring together sort of people, young people, alongside representatives from academia, NGOs, government officials. So it's important to host conferences like this. So just to go back to the paper, you debunk several myths about young people's digital lives, like short attention plans, or there is a talk that apparently young people don't care about privacy, but in fact they keep changing their Instagram sort of settings because they do. And you discussed several myths, which were sort of, that rang a lot of bell. It was a bit like reading about disinformation, like a common narrative that you hear. And then you had the truth and it was like, oh, yeah, this is actually true. People care about this, but for some reason, everyone is perceived that everyone wants to be an influencer. No one cares about data privacy. You know how it is. So I thought the myths were really, really helpful. If you can classify, and this may be a difficult question, but out of the myths that you have debunked, which one do you think is most harmful?
I think the most harmful one is that young people are ambivalent about information disorders. So let me break. I mean, information disorders is again, it's another one of these complicated words, okay? Because a lot of people mix this up with the whole thing of fake news and not fake news, and I guess the narrative started becoming very popular before and during the first Trump administration. We now know that the whole thing has gone ballistic. But the whole idea of differentiating between misinformation, disinformation, malinformation is first important. Okay, so misinformation is when people make mistakes. Okay, so my mistake might be that I'll say, Nina Shengelia lives in Hungary. Okay, that's a mistake. Okay, disinformation is if I'm saying that, again, let me use you as an example. You and I met at an OSCE conference in Vienna, and I can say disinformation is that Nina Shengelia went to the OSCE conference with an agenda to publicize the Georgian government's rapprochement to Russia. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Malinformation is where you put up a picture of. You could say, because you were on the same podium I was on, and there was somebody from Moldova, and there was even some students that we had over there, and you take a picture of all of us over there, and you could put down, I don't know. So the context is correct, right? And you could put down, next OSCE conference in Georgia, where Nina Shengelia has now been given a plum job within the Ministry for Education or something like that, and Professor Grech and these students are being invited in terms of the new conference on the new openness within your country. So there are mistakes there's deliberate strategies, trolls, and then there's like you use something which is seemingly innocent and then you plonk it out of context. So again, and I guess this is I've experienced this in a lecture hall with several people, that the more we talk, the more people like me talk about the need for critical digital literacies, you get this feeling, you almost get the shrug of the shoulders, and it's very easy for somebody of my age, of my generation, to see that as people don't care. In other words, I don't care. I just want to spend my life cavorting and being an influencer in front of my screen. And I'm not saying none of that happens, but I guess I've repeated this many times. The lesson I learned from my son is when he told me that, your generation was lucky that you could make mistakes in private and there was nobody around to film you. And my generation doesn't have that privilege. So our anxiety, the impact it's had on our mental health, why we feel increasingly lonely, why we don't even know how we can interact with other young people, because am I supposed to use a medium, or is this medium called talk? Or what if I'm saying something to someone, or heaven, I had too much to drink and I was in a rave party and somebody filmed me and placed that again out of context. Okay, so back to malinformation we're doing. So I think that's the one which really resonates with me, because I think in terms of, you're ambivalent about these kind of information disorders, and you see this all the time now. Now with AI, now this is going to get amplified, okay? Literally, if you doom scroll now for more than 3 minutes on Instagram or on Facebook, anything with reels, you are now seeing AI reels, and they're getting so good that you don't know what's real and what isn't. Okay, so partly it might be, oh how sweet, I mean, Ozzy Osbourne just died, and I'm seeing all of these reels where Ozzy ascends to heaven and he meets Freddie Mercury or David Bowie on Jimi Hendrix, and they all seem lifelike. Okay, but then there's other things where it's like, hang on a sec, this is clickbait, isn't it? Somebody's just put in something which is blatantly not truthful, and is this here to game me? Now, the assumption is young people don't care. My experience is that young people do care. They just don't know what they can do about it. So it's easy to go click onto the next thing, or onto the next cat video, or anything else to entertain me. Because remember, we are in this, and I speak about this in the reader. We are on the age of performance, the performance economy, and the performance culture. And I guess again, this is something which young people have had to confront, which my generation did not have to confront. There is a huge pressure for people to perform to the screen, to perform to the camera, to perform to others, to make yourself, 12, 15 years ago, when I wrote my first article about why the hell are, maybe for 20, why are people in my sport island on Facebook? I said, when it's very easy to get to know each other. And then you realize that at 1 o'clock in the morning, you see all those green lights. And it reminded me of this old Beatles song called Eleanor Rigby, which is all these lonely people. And all these lonely people were there to kind of prove their existence to unknown others. And so we've gone a long way from the friend economy and the old friendsters. And I proved that I am who I am because on the basis of likes and all of this kind of stuff, to now the need to actually not just be around, but to actually perform. So your performative life, the consequence of that is the other side. And no, I don't believe that it's just young people have had problems with mental health, or everybody's got ADHD and the rest of it. But it's inevitable that the pressure on the young people to perform has had an impact, and there's been very little attention. And here I specifically think in terms of the education system, there's been very little attention to the education system to adjust to any of these things. If anything, we've kept on serving what we've always served in the old Victorian model, and just told people it's good for you. This is the way you're going to get a job. This is the way you're going to be successful. So anyway, that's a very long answer to one of the myths over there. Okay.
No, absolutely. I think it's really interesting. And also, you're right in saying that, absolutely right in saying that, young people do care. but sometimes I'm not, as a former young people or young person, I don't feel that I have power, because the way that algorithms govern us, like I almost feel powerless. Like I recognize the dangers. I know about the data privacy, especially from my background being a lawyer, and I still when I'm left vis-a-vis platforms, because I know that if my page gets blocked or if my YouTube channel gets strikes, like there is nothing that you can do about it, because content moderation, I mean, there are means to sort of you appeal, you submit a form, and you can contact them, but almost the platform accountability is non-existent, especially outside the USA. And the content moderation is failing, and it's having impact, almost horizontal impact. It's no longer just vertical, it's a horizontal impact on our lives. It's violation of human rights. It's just everything that it interferes with our thought process, freedom of speech, the way we form opinion, and there is no accountability. So I think it's a digital ecosystem that we feel powerless towards. So it's important to keep these conversations going. This brings me to my next question, which is, um, you stress that digital literacy isn't just about individual responsibility; it's also about systemic change, and I completely agree with this. What role should tech companies or governments play in supporting critical digital engagements?
Okay, I'm going to kind of bridge between what you were talking about now and your feeling of helplessness. Okay, I know you've got two young kids, and regulation on the other side. Okay, so I'll be very blunt with you. I think regulation of anything which had to do with social media failed miserably, continues to fail miserably, and despite the best efforts that I've seen with the Digital Services Act and the AI Act and whatever it is, it's like it failed miserably. And I'll explain why. Okay. So let's go back to digital literacies. I believe that we need these literacies in the classroom, in the boardroom, and the home. And those imply very different types of strategies. Okay. So in my family's case, I was already digitally literate enough to know that, again, I might have repeated this elsewhere, but I was digitally literate enough to know that when my then 12-year-old son, whom we made sure had a computer, of course, but in a public space, of course, close to his mother's computer, and we saw this 12-year-old kid playing Minecraft, but getting increasingly more tense. We thought there was something going on until I kind of pushed on and said, what's happening here? And I was told by my son, I'm busy, I'm helping people, which seemed to be really good. Oh, great. My son is helping people online. Absolutely brilliant. What are you helping people with? I'm on this Minecraft server, Dad, and I'm helping people. I need to get to the next level. What is the next level? Who owns the Minecraft server? Okay. And Jacob said, oh, well, it's another fork of Minecraft. No, who owns the Minecraft server? How are you helping with? Who are you helping with what? Are you providing free labor? Who is making money off you? You getting more tense? You get off that now, or you want to play Minecraft again. And I fixed the problem, which I could see was escalating as my son started to speak to us less, getting more interested in talking to unknown people. I don't know who was talking with on the help desk, but we killed that. That was digital literacy in the home. Okay. You see, digital literacy in the boardroom. I mean, I probably my winter years will be spent going out of the academy and going back into training, I guess, in training of corporates, because again, going back to the labor market, that's where you're going to see at the moment, another idea. Okay. You've got a lot of people my age now in positions of power saying, this Gen AI thing, I don't really get it, but I've got somebody selling me this enterprise tool. And I think for an investment of 100,000, I could get rid of about 4 people here because they're doing useless jobs. And I'm kind of thinking, where's the problem now? You're going to lose 4 useless people? Can you cross-train those people? What the can? Okay, that's the okay. And in the lecture hall, it's anarchy at the moment. Now, one of the few good things my university actually did do was they did embrace AI and said, we can't resist this. Okay, we have to find some way of using the technology and put it to good use. So that means we're going to have to, so they took an enterprise version of Google for Education. They're encouraging academics to use Notebook LM and the rest of it. And it still hasn't fixed the assessment criteria. It still hasn't fixed the way we deliver lectures. Okay, so I go back to the first problem. I believe you need these critical literacies individually, whether you're an educator, whether you're a parent, or whether, because I believe that everybody can do something to understand what's going on, including you in Georgia with your 2 young kids, and including those people who have tenure at a university at the moment and think that they can keep on doing what they've done for life, and that students will keep on coming back because they think that getting the accreditation on the bunny hat is going to deliver them some sort of wonderful future. The regulation stuff, when I said it's failed, I go back first with social media, and I've had many discussions with well-meaning people within European organizations who still think that you can regulate, social media the same way you regulate orthodox, regulated journalism, mainstream journalism, because of, press clubs and legislations and things like that. We all know that we've all been using US technology, US platforms, and it have essentially one business model called the advertising model. And the advertising model, I don't need to preach to the converted here. We all know what happened with the attention economy. We pay for stuff with our data. And the fines that the EU put in place were obviously not large enough or not significant enough, or potentially even the EU is not a large enough market not to convince people in the US right now, especially in the kind of brave new world that they're in, not to just say, you know what, I don't care anymore. And again, we've seen this again in terms of, how the various metas have gone from, employing people to do some fact checking. And because at the end of the day, the same way that I couldn't live without the internet, and neither could you, and neither could anybody. I think we all know there's a lot of stuff happening over there that young people for a while need to be protected as they're going through life, particularly when they're in the teenage years. Yeah. Nothing's worked. Nothing has worked. And I think, well-meaning as the EU is at the moment, trying to race ahead in terms of the AI and saying, we know now that the risks we had with social media were X. Now they're going to be 15X. It's not just because of deep fakes and things like that. Okay, we're now talking about AGI. We're now talking about being dependent on technologies to have the most basic things in our lives. What's going to happen to human beings? So I'm afraid, and I know you're a lawyer, I'm not incredibly convinced that the EC can regulate US technology to be more responsible. I'm not very convinced of that. So then what can you do? It goes back to the whole, I'm afraid, maybe naively, the whole principle of understanding what's happening with young people. So these things where we're talking about loneliness, mental health, fear of real things like climate change, fear of not having jobs, and then fear of how all of these things are being interpreted online. That's something we should be looking at. And I think regulators then can get involved in that. But always remember that education in any country, in any sovereign states, it's up to the jurisdiction of the sovereign state, of the nation state, to do what it wants. The EC can suggest whatever it wants in terms of how we can have better education. The Hungarys and Maltas of this world can decide what they want to incorporate and what they don't. It's left up to the nation state. So regulation can only do so much. In terms of technology, it can do so much in terms of risks and identifying what is risky content, what isn't. And so I am, in my small way, in our small way, and those of us who believe in lifelong learning, actually believe that you might have more longer lasting effect if you start early in a person's life cycle, both with the parents and younger people, to understand the wonderful things and the absolutely horrendous things which are likely to happen and already happening now. In other words, to get some sort of human agency, okay, from the parent side and the kid's side, because we keep on thinking that these kids are dumb. They ain't. but they're confused sometimes. They're bored most of the times. And who wouldn't be bored in going to an orthodox lecture with 50 30 slides that the lecturer has decided not to change because he is ex-professor of whatever it is. Okay.
Sure.
So I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm saying I hope regulation works. I'm not very confident it will. There is geopolitics being played, and it needs to be played at the highest level now. But in the same way, I read today somewhere that the trouble with Europe is that it doesn't have many roads which are good for warfare, is what I read today. Okay? That tells you where budgets are going to go into EU. Are they going to go into education? Are they going to go into, resisting US technology when the EU has just agreed on the 15% tariff, which Trump is very happy with? So it boils down to, I'm afraid, the individual. I'm afraid it really does where I'm coming from. I'm not into this educational lark. I think anybody who goes into education is not there to make money. Is there to help people and just help the next generation. I'm not very hopeful. Okay, so I'm sorry if that's what you wanted to hear. And even though I keep on asking for people interpret the AI Act properly for me, let's look at the impact vis-a-vis other legislations and what does it mean for the end user, the end citizen. We've got a long way to go, and the chances are that things are going to change so quickly over the next 5 years that as Generation Alpha moves out of its, playing at home to trying to get to school, we don't even know what the interface is going to be at the moment in terms of technology. We've been relying on the screen, and if you speak to any one of my AI mates, they're saying, oh, it's not going to go to the specs. And eventually there won't be a screen, and eventually you have implants, and eventually these people, these kids of ours will live to 100. But so many things are changing that I think the least we can do is help people to stop for a while and try and understand what's going on. And many of us don't have a clue of what's going on. So I'm sorry, if it's a pessimistic answer.
No, I think it's a realistic answer, and I think it's really, really sort of it's the harsh truth that regulation on many fronts is indeed failing, and it's really difficult to put genie back in the bottle. It's almost impossible. So I think lifelong learning that you have proposed, as well as parental role in this and guidance for young people, is extremely important, as well as educators' role. But sometimes we face the difficulties within people in sort of higher education, in schools, that educators for the first time encountered this digital learning environment during COVID, and we saw sort of the difficulties and the challenges that they were facing at that time. So I think it's important to equip those with the skill, equip the educators, first of all, with the skills. And I think it's important for traditional universities not to play down the importance of digital literacies, because, we see a lot of sort of universities that are following the traditional line and sort of disregarding the genie that's already out of the bottle. And sometimes students don't even have enough guidance on what kind of use of AI is ethical. Some universities are even ambiguous about this, like what level of AI usage is permitted, basically, including, like, for example, some of the universities in Georgia, like I know that people are using AI, but they don't have guidance. And as a lecturer, you are also a bit lost, like you don't know how to guide these people, because the university hasn't issued guidance on this. So it's important to keep the conversation going. I think the work that you're doing is incredibly important, both through your academic activities as well as 3CL. And I would like to thank you so much for taking time to being our guest today at the podcast. And I'm sure that this will be extremely interesting for the EUI audience, as well as sort of wider audience that are interested in this subject. So thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks, Tina. Keep well.